wonder that how many of my readers have been called upon to pass through an experience that I have endeavored to describe in the previous chapter. Those who have will find themselves be able to extend me a larger measure of sympathy and find themselves possessing clearer understanding to its character than those who have not. I believe, however, in some measure, if not all, will be able to at least appreciate the tremendous crisis it represented to me. The very first ground I stood hitherto crumbled beneath my feet. Remember that of my earliest infancy, I had never heard or learned anything about religious characters except the tenets or the teachings of the Adventists on the validity and my acceptance on them, and the authority of the Holy Scripture. The very fact of God Himself had turned, as I let go of them, as I seemed of that at the same time, to be letting go of every other thing of human and divine. My soul, because a rifled chamber robbed mulelessly of every very treasure, every laudable impulse and uprearing desire died away in my heart, died away swiftly as a soldier dies in the heat of battle, as a bullet crushes in his brain. The light of the spiritual firmament faded suddenly into blackness of darkness. My sun went down to the high noon. The experience which I have passed through is now but a memory, yet a memory that has never ceased to exert an influence to my attitude towards my fellow men. Once in a while I came into contact with a man who was treading the same difficult and darkened pathways that were mine at that time, with which I am dealing now. On such a one, my heart goes out, because I know how utterly lost a man can feel when he finds himself suddenly bereft of everything on which his soul was stayed. Men there are of whom I have met thousands, who are making their ways through life without a single problem or question relating to spiritual things, or relating to creed or belief. Not various men, these not notoriously evil. On the contrary, many are to be reckoned as being among the most respected members of the society. Such members as these simply have no place in their schemes of things. That's all. Born in homes where no attention or significance was given to the things of the spirit. Reared in an environment where personal religion played no part. They have grown maturity and completely insensible to the appeal of anything which does not immediately to the sense and time. With such men, ignorance is the indeed bliss, or at least freedom from the gnawing worm. But let a man have behind him an upbringing such as mine. It not matter what character of teaching he may have been under the influence of, and the case is altered instantly. Try as he will by any sort of known means, laudable or reprehensible as the world judges, he will fail to still the mutterings or conscience, or rid himself to the appeal of the Christian faith. He may find distraction in dissipation, in social, even political, in love, marriage, and discharge of the family duties. But still, he will hear the voice of warning, pleading, condemning voice, crying, "This is the way, walk thou in it." This is no call to the unconverted. I am now making no appeal to the sinners, but a plain statement of a plain fact. And so, I say again, my heart always beats in sympathy to any man who having or once had a vision, no matter how misleading, of the sacred things, find himself compelled to turn his face away to find confusions and chaos. That is a stretch to life's journey, along which a man makes his way with bowed head and bleeding feet. It is a stretch I know well, for I have trodden with heavy heart and bitter tears. For that conference committee appointed to investigate my heresy, I talked readily enough about being willing to go to hell. Well, in the days following my breakaway in the beliefs of my childhood, I pretty nearly succeeded in getting there. In my case, I had a fairly realistic rehearsal of what its experience are going to be. For my soul, that may eventually find its way there. I left the Adventist school in Detroit and went back to my father's home in Indiana, realizing that I had flung away every vestige of my faith and become an infidel, or at any rate, an agnostic. I did my level best to run away from my duty, faith, God, and myself. My father strove earnestly to me to recant my heresy, to acknowledge my having turned traitor of the faith of my childhood. The two prominent elders of the Adventist Church had added their pleading and argument to those of my father, but I turned deaf ear to them all. For me, the lamp of faith had spluttered out. I left my home in Indiana, and took the road. For 4 or 5 years, I wandered in the Middle West, doing odd jobs here and there. Often did I go ragged and hungry. During those years, I never cared 2 straws which a freight train was headed when I climbed into a boxcar, or what it was I did to keep the soul and body together. In the Michigan city, I carried bricklayers, laborers, HOD. In many towns of Indiana, I worked as a plasterer. In a broom factory in southern Illinois, now and again with the bridge construction gang, seeking rest and finding none, roaming hither and thither, with all good incentive, desire absent on which I could set my hand. I became veritably lost. All the while I endeavored to foster my hatred and rejection of all religious beliefs. I had Tom Paine, Bob Ingersoll, and host of many writers to bolster up my contempt for a religion, to keep alive within me the conviction that Christian belief of every kind was sheer imaginative nonsense, presenting neither foundation reasonable nor logic. As to what extent I succeeded in fooling me of these particulars, I cannot today really determine. Probably not at all. Looking backwards, I would see myself as a drunkard or a dopeend, striving to down some incidents of his past in whiskey or cocaine. I strove to lay a ghost which refused to be laid, a blotcut of a memory that baffled to all my efforts to eliminate it. To die, I had an immortal soul to all the good things, the mockery, the pain, the bitterness, the fluidity of it all. Presently, I made my way back to Detroit. The vast industries formed the activities of the Michigan city were then undeveloped. The whole community was in throes of a commercial slump, and the poverty and suffering among the poor was very acute. Distress prevailed on every hand. My mind reverted to Agnes D. Archambault. I began to think of the good she would strive to be doing, were she still alive. Out of the thought, something to relieve the misery that surrounded me on every side. Here again was the evidence of how the influence of life given over to the service of humanity continues to exert its power long after its owner has passed from the sphere of mundane things. Here was I, a man who for years was striving to drive out of my ken and remembrance of the last recollection of everybody and everything, of the worthy or ennobling nature, finding myself drawn back to the viewprint of a servant of the Jesus, looking with the eyes of pity, of distressed and possessed by a desire to help the needy. In short, doubling back to the unworthy motives I had striven desperately to foster, through a stretch of arid, wasted years. Shall I say Christly impulse that had throbbed within me since my dismissal from the Adventist school. With the aid of some of the residents of the city, I was enabled to open a laundry that provided employment to quite a number of poor people, which were without work and almost without bread. The church people began to send their businesses, and the concern soon began to go underway. I was also able to get them to donate a carload with provisions of distribution among the neediest of the city's residents. It was, I think, while engaged in this work, that I once more found myself among the shadows. I once more find the glimpse of light. Here was I, who for years had been railing against God and goodness, simply forced to a conclusion that whether deity existed or not. There were good people in the world, people who were not ashamed to confess that they have found their incentive to aid their fellows in the love of Christ, and in a belief in the principle he increasingly proclaimed. Looking back to this particular period of my life, I find myself in something of the same situation as the infield of whom Mark Rutherford tells. Rutherford relates how he once heard this man expatiating the enigmas of the world, and indicating the numerous ways in which, if he had the making of it, he could and would make it better. He would have eliminated the shadows. Mark Rutherford has left the lecturer and his lecture, in order that he might think the matter through. He came to a conclusion that the speaker was on an utterly false track, perfectly uninterrupted, infinite light, uncrossed by any shadow. He mused, is a physical absurdity. I see things because it's lighted, because of the difference in the light, or in other words, because of the shade. Without shade, the universe would be objectless, in fact, invisible. The great truth is wonderfully illustrated in my life during the experiences with which I am now dealing. Shadows aplenty were all about me. To begin with, there was a shadow that enwrapped my own soul. To be sure, some stray rays light began to creep in on the inner darkness. But at the time, they were only rays. Then there were the shadows, which physical distress and shortcomings were flinging all over the city. And there were others. Yet the truth of the old proverb that shadow proved sun was once more demonstrated. For it was while engaged in the relief work that I met what I am in a habit of calling my third angel. The first was my mother, the second was the Agnes D. Archambault, and the third was my wife. It will be seen that I destined never escaped the third angel part of my early teaching. She was at this time a superintendent of a YWCA boarding school. We were married in the following spring. The woman I chose for my life partner was possessed by a strong, robust faith. Her spiritual vision was not impaired, as was mine, by the grey and the glitter of sordid things. The pure in heart and the only pure in heart do see God. My association with her began to have an altogether uplifting and enheartening influence on my red spirit. The work was slow and difficult, yet it was always headed towards right direction. Eventually, she convinced me that all my finely spun theories and what I cleaned sledgehammer arguments were in reality not against the Christianity itself, but against a misapprehension and misinterpretation of it. I had been watching men and ignoring Jesus. The frailties and failures of humanity had kept me from seeing that the Jesus could not and would not fail. After a little time had elapsed, I determined to re-enter the ministry, this time in the Christian church, Disciples of the Christ, and accepted a small pastorate in Bluffton. The end of this fresh start in definite religious work was, however, destined to come with almost bewildering suddenness. A kindly-hearted and professedly unreligious man in the community died, in which I was laboring. Preaching his memorial sermon, I eulogized his many virtues, which brought down upon me the censure of my church officials, and my resignation was called for. For this time, it was once more out of joints for me. I had no job. By this time, I had a wife and 3 small children to support. Eventually, I became acquainted to some men who were selling clothing to farming communities for the house in Chicago. They invited me to join them. I did so, and it took but a short time to demonstrate the fact that I was a far better salesman preacher. So ended, and I began another chapter of my life, the active ministry. I left, I suppose, for the last time. Yet to anticipate events, I am today addressing larger audiences and filling more church appointments by tenfold than in the days when I was one of the cloth. But that time not yet arrived, nor had the vision of the work that I was one day to take up as yet vouchsafed me. I turned back to the commercial life without any bitterness in my heart. One day, 2 things that I learned during my second ministerial term, which I have never unlearned. They still form a part of my rule of my life. The first one is the realization of the inspiration for the effective Christian work. Service is a real living, vibrant, and love for Jesus. His ideals, his companionship, and his purposes, our jobs and ourselves is one. The second one is that always remember that our jobs and ourselves is one. Some of my readers may recall the story of the workman who was employed in the building of the great English cathedral. Day after day, during his dinner hours, his fellowmen found him sitting closely to the office of works, gazing at a colored sketch hung on one of its wall. When some of them berated him for not being sociable and mixing up with them during the noon recess, the old man with a curious light in his eyes, "No, fellows, you are wrong about that. That's not the reason I've got for sitting here day after day. I am only an old mortar mixture on this job, as you all know. But it helps me to mix my mortar better when I see what a beautiful building I am working on." That should be the spirit of every man who is engaged in any sort of work that is worth the doing. For a note, when everything shuts, a certain moment cuts the dead off, calls the glory from the grey. A whisper from the west shoots, add this to the rest. Take it and try its worth. Here dies another day. In the year